Well, we really covered a lot in this section. We learned a lot about routing, setting up routes, setting up child routes, navigating there in code, passing parameters, passing query parameters, extracting parameters dynamically, using guards, using different types of guards, preventing the user from accidentally navigating away, resolving data, passing static data, styling the links which are active, and so much more. This is how you may use the Angular router. We're going to use it in our course project soon, but I can only encourage you to play around with it to really get a feeling for it. And I will also take a closer look at these observables we used in this section so that you feel more comfortable using them too. Let's move on. Welcome back to the recipe book. Now that we learned about routing in the last course section, it's time to add it to our recipe book course app. This is the structure of our app thus far, and we already got a lot of components and so on. Right now we implemented the navigation in our application with ngIf though, and that is not really the best way of navigating around. Instead, I want to use the Angular router to load pages and to allow the user to, well, switch between pages. In this section, however, we will not only add the router, we will also add one new component, the recipe edit component, because now that we have a way of loading different pages, we can also add this. This is the component which we will fill with some life after the forms section in this course, which will then allow us to create new recipes or edit existing ones. So I want to set up routing in this section, and we definitely need routes to load either the shopping list or the recipe book. But inside of the recipe book section of the app, I want to have some child routes targeting the recipe detail or recipe edit component. These components, which will always be loaded on the left side of our list of recipes, should be loaded dynamically, and only one of the two should be loaded at a time, therefore child routing. So that is the general structure. Let's now put this into practice and build our application and add routing to it, starting in the next lecture. So here is the course project in the state we last left it. ngserve is already running in a terminal, and now I want to add routing. Now let's start with the root routes, with the routes for our overall application, before we then dive into the child routes. You learned how to add such routes, and therefore, here's a challenge for you. Try implementing the main routes of our application, so to load the recipe page and the shopping list page on your own. So right now, I will give you a couple of seconds to pause the video and try this on your own, then we'll implement this together. So, were you successful? Here is my solution. For the root routes, I will add an app routing module, as shown in the routing section. So let's add it in the app folder, the app routing.module.ts file. Now in there, as you learned it, we're going to export a TypeScript class which is called app routing module. And this module has only one purpose. It will provide the routing to our application. It will bundle all the routing functionality, so to say. Now here we need to add ng-module to this class to transform it from a normal TypeScript class into an Angular module. And for this, we also need to import ng-module here at the top. Now, ng-module takes a JavaScript object in which we can configure it in greater detail. However, we won't need to configure that much for our routing module. Mainly, we will need to register our routes. So let's set them up first. I'll add a constant named app_routes, and this will be of type routes, just like that. Now, routes needs to be imported from @AngularRouter, and as you learned, routes simply is just an array of JavaScript objects where each object represents a route. So let's add the first route. Now, which routes do we need? As mentioned, a route which loads our recipe section and a route which loads our shopping list section. So let's start with the recipes. I'll set up a path which will be displayed in the URL and which will allow us to go to that route. And let's say recipes sounds like a good path for this, so that you can visit your domain and then /recipes to reach this route. Now, when we visit recipes, I want to load the recipes component. So I'll assign that component here, the recipes component. And of course, we need to add the import of that component. So make sure to add this at the top, pointing to the recipes folder and then the recipes.component file. That's our first route added. Of course, one route is not everything we need here. We also need a second route. So I'll quickly duplicate this. And here I now want to target shopping list. So let's set up this route too. And here, of course, the goal is not to target the recipes component, but instead we want to target the shopping list component, our second main route. And as the recipes component, we need to import this and add the import statement at the top. With that, we got two routes to load. And we also got a problem. When we first visit the page, we will navigate to neither of the two. We will just visit the path with, well, basically an empty path, so just our domain / nothing. Therefore, we should add another path here, another route. Here I want to target an empty path, so basically the path we will reach when we load the app for the first time. And here we could now either also load the recipes component, but that's not really what I want to do. Instead here, I want to redirect to /recipes. So I will redirect to and now /recipes. Now let's try implementing it like this. In my ng module here, I now will import the router module like that. You have to import it from @Angular router. On the router module, we can call for root. And here we should pass our app routes to configure this router module Angular ships with. With that, our routes are now configured and added to the Angular router. Now, since we are in an extra module here and we want to get this into our main module, into our app module, I need to export this readily configured router. So I will add the exports array here and simply export router module. Now important here without calling for root, because we already did that. Now it's really all about exporting this configured router. With that configured and exported here, we can go to the app module, and here in the imports array, we should import our app routing module and of course also add this import here at the top, so that you make sure to import app routing module from /approuting.module from this file. With this, routing was added to the application. Now we need a place for Angular to render our routes. So that is something I will set up right now in the app component. Here, where we currently use our ngIf trick to decide which route should be loaded, well, here I will remove this approach and instead add the router outlet to mark the place where the Angular router should render the component we should load depending on the path we are at. With that, we got a place to load our routes. Now, we got no links as of now, we will add them soon, but let's first check if this all works. So with ngserve running, I will save this to trigger the recompilation, and then I will have a look at the running app. Here we get an error. And the error message gives us a hint on how to fix this. But what's the issue? The way we configured it, we will always redirect the router because the default matching strategy of the router is for the path, it will see if it's a prefix of the current path. And the empty path, which is our redirect route, if you check it here, this route here, uses an empty path, and therefore this is part of any route we visit, because again, the default matching strategy is prefix, so it will check if this empty path is a part of the total path. And of course it is, it's part of every path. So that wasn't a problem when we were redirecting from, let's say, something to somewhere else, because now we had a very specific path, and of course we would also redirect something / anything else, but it would not be part of every route. Well, an empty path is part of every route. It's easy to be fixed, and actually the error message told us how to do that. We have to add the path match property here and set this to full. This overrides the default of prefix and says now only redirect if the full path is empty. So we won't redirect on any other paths. With this, if we save this and we reload the page, Here we see this now works and we were redirected to recipes. I can demonstrate this if we reload the page. Again, we're gone to recipes. And if I try loading the shopping list path, that also works. So navigation works. Now the goal is to hook up the links in our navigation, because that of course right now is not working anymore. In the last lecture, we added routing. We set up our routes for this application and we can load them, but the links are not working as expected, so we should fix this. With our main route set up, we can go to the header component. And here I want to change the way we navigate. I no longer need the click listeners here. And also I don't need the ref elements. So we should remove that so that our app doesn't reload, because right now if you click the links, it will simply send a request to the server and reload the page. So remove that. And I can also remove the onSelect method here and remove the event emitter, the header component. So basically all that code, also the imports. And now we can simply use router link. And here I want to create an absolute link to /recipes. And for the shopping list, here I will create an absolute link to /shopping list. And of course, you could also use that alternative syntax taught in the last lectures, in the last course section actually, where you would enclose router link into squared brackets. And then you would pass an array between the double quotation marks here to configure the individual segments of your path. But since here all I want is to go to these root routes, there is no need to do so, and that is the quickest way of setting up our paths here. So with that, if we save this, we should already see that navigation is working again, and it is, that's great. But I also want to mark the active route here. So that is what I'll work on in the next lecture. In the last lecture, we added navigation. And we are now able to switch between our pages here. That's great. Now I want to mark the active route. And actually, Bootstrap, the CSS framework we're using, gives us a class to mark the active route. If we add this class to the list item which holds the link, it's the active class there. If we save this, now this is marked as active. Of course, it doesn't change because I hard-coded it into there. But this is the class we dynamically need to add. Well, and you learned how to do this. We got a helpful directive for this, the router link active directive. Here we simply define the class we want to conditionally attach to this element whenever the link on this element or nested inside of it, like it's the case here, gets active. So here that would be the active class as we just saw. And the same of course for shopping list. So router link active should also be placed on this one. And with this, you see it's still active, but now it switches because now the CSS class gets applied to the correct route. So that's now working. With that, let's make sure that when I click a recipe here, we don't actually reload the app as we do now. If you watch this reload icon next to the browser URL bar, that happens because we still have this ref element on it. So we will fix this and then think about the next steps of our app.